right, so yesterday you guys learned about Adoniram, and Adoniram. Yesterday you learned about Adoniram, and today you get to learn about his wife, Anne. Okay, so I am going to tell you the story of Anne and how she met Adoniram and how they ventured out to start a missionary life in Burma. Okay, Burma is so far away from here. It's on the other side of the globe. So let's figure out, how did they get there? Well, I'm going to tell you about Anne today. Before she married Adoniram, her name was Anne Hasseltine, or Nancy, as her friends and family called her. Anne was born just before Christmas in 1789. She was the youngest of 5 children, born to John and Rebecca Hasseltine. John doted on his youngest daughter. He just loved her and would do anything for her. Anne was lively, she was adventurous, she was cheerful, she was highly intelligent and very popular. Actually, all of the Hasseltine children were very popular. They were so popular and they had so many friends that their dad even built a ballroom onto their house so his children could entertain their friends with lavish parties. So you can even see back here, there's like a whole separate part of their house that he added just so his kids could have their friends over. She was the girl that everyone wanted to be friends with. And she was, because she was so friendly. Anne's early days in Bradford, Massachusetts were blissful, and she often described herself as the happiest girl in the world. She grew up with all means of comfort and luxuries, and she had not a care for anything. Now, like most prominent families during this time, the Hasseltines attended the local church that stood in the center of town. But church for them was really just a means to see their friends. They didn't take the religion part seriously. Anne's mother raised her to believe that if she was a good person and she did good deeds and avoided doing anything wrong, that she would go to heaven. So Anne never wavered in this belief, and she spent much of her life just trying to be good. However, these beliefs were challenged when she was a teenager at Bradford Academy. Now, in 1805, when Anne was 16 years old, a new teacher was hired at her school. This young man was intensely serious about heaven and hell. He taught that salvation was not based on how good you were. Only true repentance and faith in Jesus Christ as Lord could save a person's soul from hell. Anne found her assumptions about God and salvation challenged. This began a season of intense wrestling for Anne. And God used this teacher to start waking Anne up to the biblical gospel and how the Bible explained salvation. And over time, her heart and mind began to change, but not without much struggle. However, Anne was not the only one at this time wrestling with the ideas of heaven and hell and salvation. By the spring of 1806, almost 100 young people at Anne's school had become Christians. The intensity of their conversions were overwhelming to Anne. But these conversions were not confined to Anne's school. All over New England in the early 1800s, men and women were hearing the gospel and submitting their lives to Christ. During this revival in Bradford, Anne's entire family became real Christians, and Anne's father even became a leader at their church. Many of Anne's friends were converted too, but Anne was not really convinced that this was for her. Because Anne was taught that she could avoid going to hell by just being good, she struggled to understand how a good God could punish a person who spent their whole life doing good deeds. Could God really send her to hell for being kind to others? What Anne did not fully understand was the magnificent character of God. She struggled for months to reconcile her beliefs and what she grew up thinking with what the biblical gospel said. Many of her thoughts centered around parties and fancy clothes and being with friends. She didn't really care to do Bible study or to pray or to go to church really seriously. So she just didn't do those things. And if she ignored doing those things, then she didn't really have to think about what was going to happen to her soul. But God was working to get a hold of Anne's heart. And one Saturday, as she was planning to go out for a party, Anne stumbled upon a book lying on her table. And she skimmed the page, and her eyes found this line. It said, "She that lives in pleasure is dead while she lives." So Anne made a hasty promise right then and there. She was going to give up her fancy clothes. She was going to stop going to her parties. She was even going to stop eating fruit because she thought that was a luxury. She thought, you know what? If I give up eating fruit, I will be holy and God will be pleased with me. Well, that didn't really work. And after a couple days, she forgot about all the promises she made to God. Then later, she read the book Pilgrim's Progress, and she felt a deep conviction over her sin. So again, she made hasty promises to God. God, I promise I will give up all the fun things so I can just live a life pleasing you. Well, she didn't really follow through on her promises again. Even though Anne knew the deep importance of serving God, she couldn't do it. She felt like it was an impossible task. As Anne outwardly tried to appear more righteous, inwardly, she was harboring a great heart of rebellion towards God. Anne even wrote in her diary that her heart was filled with aversion and hatred towards a holy God. She was beginning to despair. She was trying to act like a Christian, but she was not growing in her love for God. Then one day, Anne paid a visit to her aunt. And she didn't intend to share all of the things that were going on in her heart and mind with her aunt, but this sweet woman just started asking her questions. And Anne started telling her everything that she was struggling with. And Anne's aunt urged her to repent of her sin, to agree with God that she was a sinner, and that none of her righteous deeds or desires could save her. God was so patient with Anne, and Anne finally repented. Despite questioning his character, God chose to save Anne, and she discovered the beauty of salvation offered through Jesus Christ. Now, Anne's conversion gave her a new love for God and for Christ and for Christians and for the Bible. Anne would spend most of her nights studying the Bible or reading religious books, and then during the day she would meet with her friends and she would tell her friends all about what she read, what God was teaching her. She would share the gospel, and she was just amazed at God's mercy and kindness in saving her. Anne continued to be one of the happiest creatures on earth, but now she found true happiness in the love of God, not in the fancy things of the world. And at the age of 17, Anne's hunger for holiness and to live a life of service to the Lord led her to take a job as a teacher. And she taught at several schools throughout Massachusetts, and she always prayed that her students would become Christians. So every morning before school started, she would pray for the kids in her class. But not only would she pray for the kids in her class, she would also pray for people on the other side of the world. You can see the map in her classroom. She would pray for those people. She didn't know them, but she knew that they needed the gospel. And so God was even starting to prepare her for the life of a missionary. Then, on June 28, 1810, a young man, zealous for missions, entered Anne's life. This young man, like Anne, carried a passion for overseas missions. He was fervent in his desire to share the gospel with unreached people all over the world. He worked hard to create a mission-sending agency that would fund American people to go out into the world and share the gospel all over the place. Who do you think this man was that Anne met? Say it. Say his name. Adoniram, right? Finally, Adoniram and Anne meet, and they meet at her house at a dinner party. He shows up with some friends, and Anne and her sisters were often called upon to entertain their guests. And so it was during this luncheon that Adoniram and Anne first meet. And he sees her beautiful curly dark hair and her blue eyes, and he is just in love. He is so in love that he leaves that luncheon convinced that she's the love of his life and he's going to marry her. So 1 month after meeting Anne, Adoniram writes to Anne asking if she would marry him. Now, it was not proper for young ladies at this time to say yes right away. So she made him wait a whole week before she gave him a response. And even in her response, she said, "I can't answer you because you have to get permission from my parents." So Adoniram has to write a letter to her parents explaining what he wants to do. And these are the words he wrote. He wrote, "I have now to ask whether you can give permission to part with your daughter next spring, to see her no more in the world, whether you can give permission to her departure and her subjection to the hardships and sufferings of a missionary life, whether you can give permission to her exposure to the dangers of the ocean, to the fatal influence of the southern climate of Burma, to every kind of want and distress, to degradation, insult, persecution, and perhaps a violent death. Can you give permission to all of this for the sake of Zion and the glory of God?" He wrote those words to her parents. Now, Adoniram wrestled with this. He was like, this is crazy. They're never going to say yes. But he needed to tell Mr. and Mrs. Hasseltine the truth. He needed them to know that if Anne decided to marry him, her life was going to be very, very hard. So 1 week after he wrote that letter to her parents, he heard their reply. John and Rebecca Hasseltine, they did not want Anne to marry Adoniram. They did not really want her to leave her comfortable life and go serve in Burma. But they knew their daughter. And so they said, we're going to leave it up to her, and she's going to decide what she wants to do. So Anne asked many people, what should I do? What should I do? And a lot of people, they didn't really want Anne to leave either. There had been no woman who ever left America to go serve in the mission field across the world. So they didn't really understand what was going on. So they were telling Anne, don't go, don't go. But Anne spent several months just thinking and praying about what she should do. She would often write in her diary, and she would ask God, is this really from you? Do you really want me to go to Burma? She knew that she was probably going to get very sick. She knew she was probably going to take lots of sea voyages that were going to be very hard and difficult. She knew she might even die. So she prayed about it over and over and over. She was worried about her safety, but she knew that God was going to protect her. If he could protect her in Massachusetts, he could protect her in Burma. So finally, Anne says yes to Adoniram. And even though she knows she would probably never see her friends or family again, she had to go. This was God's call for her life. So, remember yesterday, Adoniram, when he left to go to England, what happened to him? He got captured by... Right. So sea travel during this time was really risky. It was really hard to plan. But Anne and Adoniram knew they needed a ship. So they were praying for a ship. They wanted a ship to come and get them, to take them to Burma. And finally a ship arrives. They hear of a ship that's going to leave in 2 weeks. It's not going to Burma, it's going to India, which is kind of close, but it's leaving in 2 weeks. So they have 2 weeks to get everything ready. They have to get married, they have to say goodbye, they have to pack all of their things so that they can go. So on February 5th, the young couple were married. The same day of their wedding, they had a farewell ceremony where all of their friends and family came and said goodbye. Imagine going to a wedding and then saying goodbye to the bride and groom, and you're never going to see them again. Everybody was crying. Everybody was sad. But Anne and Adoniram were hopeful. Finally, their ship was ready. They were married. They were packed. Their ship was ready. They were ready to go. And a storm came. So they had to wait for the storm to pass. And while they waited for the storm to pass, Adoniram was growing more and more heartbroken over what he was asking his wife to do. He knew this was very hard for her to leave her comfortable life behind. But as he watched her say goodbye again and again and again, he was blown away by her courage and her bravery. And he didn't even know that one day that same courageous woman was going to save his life. So finally, the ship is ready. They board the boat. Anne is looking out into the ocean, and she is so overjoyed. She is so excited to start her life as a missionary. But next to her, Adoniram is silently praying to God. God, please protect us. May we all live to see India. And so that's where we're going to leave the story today. And you get to come back tomorrow and hear what happens next.